On today's Locked On Texans podcast, we are joined by B. Scott of 610 Sports Radio. But we open up looking at saving more money now that Titus Howard and the Texans agreed to a contract restructuring.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, H-Town? Texans fans all across the world. Welcome to this weekend episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're making up a day, but welcome to the weekend show where we kind of get a little bit more fun, right? Thank you for checking in and watching the Locked On Texans podcast. If this is your first time watching or listening, please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast, or and make sure that you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube. Do the whole nine. If this is your second, third, fourth, fifth time returning listeners listening to the Locked On Texans podcast, thank you for stopping by. Please make sure that you come back once again as Cody and I continue to talk Texans. We're going to look at how to handle the draft, the biggest move of the offseason so far. That conversation will be with B. Scott. Glad to have him back. We're going to open up today's episode, how the Texans are saving more money and what does that mean for their immediate future plans to build this roster, right? They have, we'll talk about the numbers, roughly $30 million now. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, Texans credential media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in your pocket. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Cody, Titus Howard did the team a favor. Also, it doesn't sound like he's going to be the only one, right? There could be another move, possibly. Who knows? But he did the team a favor by moving around some things, helping them out with the money. The Texans save a boatload of money. They're now around $30 million. Let's talk about that. What's going on, saving money, and what are your thoughts on what could potentially happen from this?
Yeah, so on Friday, the Houston Texans did restructure Titus Howard contract, saved $10 million. So now the Houston Texans have a projected $30 to $31 million as of right now. I remember early on in the week, we talked about, them restructuring Shaq Mason's contract. And John, this is just one of them situations where I'm just looking at it from a standpoint that Nick Caserio and Coach DeMeco Ryans probably got something up their sleeve. It's always good to rework players' contract and save as much money as possible. But I'm wondering if there's somebody either on the trading block or if there's somebody that's already in-house that they're looking forward to extending. The one person that comes to mind when I take a look at, what this can possibly mean at least in-house is the upcoming extension for Nico Collins. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, at the NFL Combine, General Manager Nick Caserio talked about the possibility of extending Nico Collins' contract. He's going to be up for this upcoming season, and I'm pretty sure this is a team, especially considering that him and CJ Stroud have a good relationship. And look, this is one of the positives of having a damn good quarterback. The quarterback is always going to make sure. Matter of fact, the franchise star is going to make sure that you take care of his guys. And, of course, Nico Collins is one of C.J. Stroud's guys, both on and off the field, inside and outside the locker room. However, John, the one thing about this is the money that they're saving has nothing to do with Nico Collins' upcoming extension, because whenever that kicks in, it's going to kick in for the 2025 season. So that means Nick Caserio and Coach DeMeco Ryans is definitely looking on the trading block and thinking to themselves, hey, who I can get in the trade? You already addressed the defensive line. A lot of times, the cornerback room, I think Jeff Okudah has that ability to be the starting cornerback, started next to Derek Stingley Jr. I understand that the safety unit could definitely use an upgrade like we talk about every week on this show. However, I don't think there's nobody on the market as of right now that's definitely going to, take up majority of all your salary cap space. Once again, $31 million. So that only leaves one realistic option. Could the Houston Texans actually trade for, let's say, one of the most disgruntled wide receivers in the league right now, and Stephon Diggs, who for this upcoming season has a salary cap of $18.5 million? Just throwing it out there. Who knows?
I think you don't make this move for a free agent. You may make this move to help you after you have some money left over for available free agent. And then when you look at the safety market, Quandre Diggs and Justin Simmons are still available, right? But I think this move, like you said, Cody, I think this move is a move for the Texans to address the wide receiver position, which they've tried to do before in the past, right? With the Keenan Allen, didn't work out, didn't fall through. And so this is a team that understands, regardless of how we address the draft, which we'll talk about how to handle the draft moving forward, we got to get a playmaker in here. Not only a playmaker, I think where they are now, they need a name. You don't get a name without money behind it, right? Like, you may be able to get, 2 years ago, you may have been able to get Cody and I, without some money. But right now, we got names. So you need some money. But all seriousness, I think this move is going to be centered around Houston potentially trading for a stud receiver. Right? We could be wrong. We haven't heard word yet. And if we do, we'll try to share that with you if we can. But that's my only thought right now. How can they upgrade this roster? And they've done it on the D-line, which was a position unit that up and down, right, last year. And even with this offseason, interchangeable guys going in, guys coming in, guys going out, guys coming in. The linebacking unit, I think, is, you can say with an upgrade. Cornerback position, you still could look to make an upgrade, but to this point, I'm okay with Okuda, right?
Me too.
I'm okay with him, and I think that Houston will still address the cornerback position in the NFL draft. I see this move clearing up enough space for them to bring in a free agent that's available and trading for a wide receiver that can immediately bring an impact. Because with rookies, there's a learning curve right there. And now that Houston is not putting themselves in the BPA, best player available, with the number 23 overall pick, they traded that. They possibly had a chance to get Brian Thomas out of LSU. Now that they're at 42, you're looking at a position where you may be able to hit on a receiver, but you may not. You may be able to hit on the impact player that can come in day one and really, bring this offense to another level, but you may not, right? And that's the case for a lot of rookies, no matter who you are, no matter what round. But I think for this team, you're going to look at them as a team that can go in and say, "Oh yeah, we can make this play. We can make this. We got a player that can go in and immediately connect with CJ Stroud." So I like it. I just wonder what they have up their sleeve. What player do they feel like is going to be that guy? There's always a Stephon Diggs talk. There's always T. Higgins. Houston and T. Higgins has been linked to each other for a while now, right?
And his projected salary for the upcoming season is 21 to 22 because he signed that franchise tag.
Exactly. So you're looking at a situation where, hey, let's get T. Higgins and we're one of those safeties. Could they look out for us? Now there is some safeties that's signed under contract right now, but would you trade for a safety, Cody?
Trade for a safety? No, because I still think it's like I just say the safety market is they still have some quality guys there. Yeah. But there's nobody that there's nobody within the market as of right now that is worth clearing up this much money for. No, because even if you bring it in, who's the best safety? For the sake of this argument, who's the best safety on the market right now?
I still got a tie between Simmons and Diggs.
Okay, so Simmons, let's just take Simmons. The last time I looked at his market value, it was around 14, 15 million. So that's at least half of the salary cap space that you literally just cleared up for this year. But even then, I don't see a situation where the Houston Texans would invest that much money into Simmons. And then now you got to take a look at the reality of the situation. Well, why is Simmons still on the market? Because I thought for sure he would have been taken off the market within, if not the first week, no lower than the second week of free agency. So maybe something going on there where you could probably get him on a bargain, 1 year deal, whatever the case might be. But there's no way in the world you're going to clear up $30 to $31 million and do not go out there and try to get. It's my point exactly. And along those same lines, do not try to get one of the top big name wide receivers who could potentially be traded before the draft, especially considering that you really wanted Keenan Allen, but unfortunately, the Chargers decided not to trade him to an AFC team.
Let's see right now. So available wide receivers under contract right now: Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper. I mean, you got Tyreek Hill. They're not going to trade him. Amari Cooper. I don't think the Browns are going to trade him. I can see a situation where Devontae Adams is traded. I can see a situation where Stephon Diggs is traded. I can see a situation where, and these are all available guys. I can see a situation where Brandon Ayuk is traded. T. Higgins, right? It's some available dogs right now, guys. I can see a situation for Houston where, you know, what's the asking price for a guy like Cortland Sutton? He's a free agent after next year. It's available guys. There's some guys out there that's available that I think could immediately come in and impact this roster. Houston has an opportunity to really just bring in some talent, and I think that's what they'll do. So, unfortunately, we didn't get an opportunity. We won't get an opportunity to see the Cougs, U of H, in the Final Four in the championship game. And I know that busted a lot of brackets, but you can go ahead and say goodbye to those busted brackets because with FanDuel, especially if you put money on the game, right? With FanDuel, they let you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dance it on America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. $200 in your pocket to go ahead and reimburse and use on point spreads, money lines, even much more. You can even pick on who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment, this weekend installment of Locked On Texans. As promised, we got our guy, Mr. Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610 back in the building. B. Scott, what's going on, man? And welcome back to Locked On.
Hey, man, appreciate you for having me. Not too much, just enjoying this Texans offseason. It feels a lot better. We were talking about this before the show. It takes on, all of it takes on a different meaning and a different feeling when you got some, you know, some institutional success, if you will, between quarterback and head coach. So, like, you got some other pieces and everything like that. So, man, I've been enjoying it, man. Enjoying a little football off season, but some basketball, some baseball. You know, just taking it all in, man.
Man, this time last year when you came on the show, we debating whether or not the Texans should trade up to #1 to take Bryce Young. You know, will they be better off with CJ? You know, will they be? Is there any hope that Carolina can draft CJ and the Texans, you know, take Bryce? You know, what they're going to do with, I believe, the number 12 overall pick? Do you pair him with a receiver and all this other stuff? A year later, the biggest topic surrounding this team is whether or not the Houston Texans did a solid job handling free agency. So, B. Scott, we already know the moves that they made. What are your thoughts about the Houston Texans free agency acquisitions as of right now?
Yeah, I think that they're a better team. I think they made a lot of really good moves, a lot of really solid moves. Now, we'll see how all of that plays out on the field. But if you just look at it, man, there's an obvious, I think the big takeaway is that there's an obvious emphasis on defense, right? That's where their big moves came from. Like, I think about even before the Daniil Hunter signing, I liked the Danico Autry signing. You know, as somebody Danico Autry that being as somebody who has played in the division. Whenever we do our breakdowns of games against opposing teams, Danico Autry has been a fixture of that for the past several years as a guy who's played for the Titans and the Colts. So like I was immediately familiar with how that might be a little bit underrated by others, but certainly like, hey, 2 years, 20 million or whatever it was for Danico Autry. I was like, oh yeah, let's go. Let's do that. And that's before they signed Danielle Hunter. So once they did both of those, obviously, it sucked to see Jonathan Grenard go because, he's a good player. And as somebody that's good to have around just, as a locker room guy on top of being a really good player. But when you think about what they're bringing in for what they're letting go, I was really, really happy with those moves. I thought that those moves were clearly ones that made them better. Now, I thought it was curious letting go of Malik Collins at the time. But, the more you look at it, the more it's pretty clear that there was something missing there, that they felt like there was something missing there with Malik Collins for what he was getting paid and for what they felt like they were getting. It surprised me. I found it curious, but it looks like they're going to figure things out there at the defensive tackle spot with some journeyman guys who may not have the name recognition that we have from Malik Collins as a 3-year starter here, but are guys that they're going to go with anyway. So I like overall what they did on the defensive line in terms of the edge rushers, even though I was, disappointed about the Malik Collins trade on top of not being able to bring back Sheldon Rankins. But overall, man, I was good with it. Now, the big thing for me is you look overall offensively and you wonder, okay, so bringing back Dalton Schultz and trading for Joe Mixon, is that the fix? And I'm not saying it was an offense that needed fixing per se, but I did feel like it was an offense that needed some upgrades. If they were going to take that next step, if they were going to go to that next level, which we all are either hoping or expecting them to do. And I know that, they're a popular pick to do so, around the league. So for as much as I like what they did on the defensive side of the ball, I look at, just kind of the run it back, swap Devin Singletary for Joe Mixon thing. And I'm like, hey, man, what else is there? And so that's why I'm kind of looking at the draft and trying to see how the rest of this thing is going to play out throughout the rest of the offseason.
It's funny that you mentioned the offensive side of the ball because B. Scott, what is your confidence level at right now? Let's say if the season was to start tomorrow, what would your confidence be? Because look, we know how great CJ is. Okay. Yeah. We know what the pairing of Nico Collins and Tank Dell can do. But the one thing that John always say, that's not enough, especially considering that this is a team that we are expecting them to either replicate or do even better in 2024. But just like you said, it's almost like they had a running back offensive style. And the biggest change that they made was, of course, acquiring Joe Mixon.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Cody, because like they could run it back and it still be a good offense in theory, because we just saw them be a good offense with these guys. You know what I mean? So it's like, we had our complaints and we understand that this offense has its holes in it, but it is at the end of the day led by CJ Stroud and does have weapons like, Nico Collins and Tank Dell coming back healthy. Like it's not to use a Bill O'Brien term, it's not a horse bleep offense. There's not horse bleep on offense, I don't think. But at the same time, you do feel like, hey, now that you know what you've got in CJ Stroud, now that you know what you've got in some of these other weapons, right? Why don't you try to complement them even more with some upgrades? Now, I say that I think it's fair to point out that, there are a lot of guys that ended up getting overpaid. Like a lot of guys that I would have been interested in the Texans bringing in. I also looked at the clip at the number that they ended up getting and thought, okay, I'm okay with the Texans not necessarily doing that. So I don't want to talk out of both sides here, but I do want to point out, like, for as disappointing as it is to see them not do a lot on offense, I didn't feel like that they missed out on a whole lot in terms of value. So I'm okay with that part of it. And when you just kind of answer your question about the confidence level, I do have confidence that it's going to be a good offense because CJ Stroud's the quarterback. I do have confidence in that. But at the same time, with that being the case, you want to see more. Like you want to give him even more, so you can kind of take that next step.
Two-part question here. When you look at what they did in free agency, you mentioned overpaid, you mentioned missing out. What are your thoughts about Texans let about $4 to $5 million be the difference maker into whether or not Saquon Barkley would be wearing a Houston Texans jersey? And then along those same lines, B. Scott, do you feel that D'Amico and Nick put too much emphasis on improving the defensive line, especially considering now that, we heard the clip from the NFL owners meeting that Coach D'Amico Ryan said, look, in order for us to be a good team and win championships, we got to stop some very good quarterbacks. And they do, starting with Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson within the AFC.
Yeah, so I would have been willing to pay Saquon Barkley what he got in Philly. I don't have the contract sitting in front of me, but I would have been willing to pay it, right?
I want to say 3 years, like 37 million, something like that.
That's it. I would have done that. Okay. So I'm just gonna say that off top to answer your question. However, I am okay with drawing a line, having a line. Now their line is just clearly different from what my line is or would have been. But they're in charge, I guess that's why they're in charge and I'm not. But I would have done it, or would have been willing to do it. Now, I do think that there's something to do with maybe Saquon wanted to go home anyway. Like he's from that area. There may have been some sort of appeal. What if the case is just that if Philly hits the number that Saquon wants, and then obviously the Texans weren't coming close to it or close enough to it, but if Philly just hits that number, then it's Philly. What if the tie just goes to Philly? I don't know the answer to that, or if that's the case. But I would have done it. I'm also okay with them drawing a line and saying, hey, this is what we're willing to pay, and here's what we're not. I think that that's okay to kind of have a principle or an idea of what you're willing to do and what you're not. So, yeah, I would have liked to have seen Saquon Barkley here. Y'all know me, man. I was on the Derrick Henry. I think if I was more disappointed than anything about anything, it would have been the Derrick Henry thing. Let me pull this up too. I'm over here slapping my mic. Let me pull this up real quick because for me, that is kind of more of the disappointing part. Is that and I know, look, Derrick Henry was kind of a polarizing topic for a lot of people. They're like, oh, he's old, he's washed up. I just personally don't believe, and I don't want to say famously, but maybe hilariously put it on the radio. He's not washed up yet.
Yeah.
Yet.
And I think,
I just want to say, I think that was my thing. It was like if I could get one last really good year of Derrick Henry running people over at 2 years, 16 million. Oh man, that was the one. That would have been the one for me, man.
And I think that was the one for me. I was listening to In the Loop, and I can't remember if it was you or John Lopez that said, well, would you rather sign Derrick Henry and have him on your team other than allowing him to go to a team, let's just say the Baltimore Ravens?
We both said
look
that.
What happened.
We have both, John and I, Lopez and I had made that point multiple times before he signed with the Ravens, and obviously circled back on it after he signed with the Ravens.
Yeah, I remember that.
So both of us have been on that. Have been in lockstep on, hey man. I think it was even when I made the case, I had like the 5 reasons why you should sign Derrick Henry. And one of them literally was as a way to play defense. Playing defense against the rest of the AFC contenders that are assuredly going to be after Derrick Henry in some form or fashion. So like you get him so the Chiefs don't get him. So the Buffalo Bills don't get him. So the Miami Dolphins don't get him. So the Ravens don't get him. Right? The team that just beat you in the playoff. So yeah, no, I would prefer if you're asking me, and I know this wasn't the question, but if you're asking me, hey, if you go into the divisional game rematch against the Ravens, would you rather have Derrick Henry or would you rather the Ravens have Derrick Henry? I don't know, man. I just don't know what football people been watching where you're just like, yep, nah, it's good. Go, let him go to the other team. We good. Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce, and we gonna do this thing. And that's no disrespect to Joe Mixon and Damian Pierce, who I think are good backs. But what if you could have Derrick Henry? Like people, how quickly people forget and just allow a weird season where look, the Titans haven't been well run, I don't think, for the last couple of years. And you look at what they were working with last year from an offensive line standpoint, and the fact that there is some decline in Derrick Henry, I don't want to pretend like there isn't. There's an obvious age and wear and tear factor. The dude has had so many carries and has played so much football, but he is still big and running through, as Marshawn Lynch would say, running through an MF's face. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
he's still like that. So I don't know. That would have been my thing.
welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. This weekend installment. B. Scott, I gotta ask you this question because you, like me, John, grew up Rockets fans. We also cover the Rockets now. You've been around that team the last 3 years, just like the Houston Texans. Me and John had this conversation on yesterday's show. Just really quick, are you starting to get the sense that CJ and Jalen Green can have this city on fire like Deshaun Watson and James Harden once did? Just really quick, just for fun.
Yeah. No, I mean the star potential is there. I said this earlier before we started recording. I was mentioning this to somebody. Like the way he has played over the past month or so, he being Jalen Green, is like the whole reason why you drafted him number 2 overall.
Yeah,
like just the ability to get by anybody, and the issues with Jalen Green, just real quick, were the fact that his jump shot was inconsistent and he wasn't finishing around the rim the way you would expect somebody with that kind of athleticism and ability.
Yeah.
Well, now he is.
The one thing as of right now, the Houston Rockets 11-game win streak at the time of this recording, and they're literally on the heels of the Golden State Warriors for the play-in tournament. And as I watch these last 2 games, Jalen has gotten to the point, like I look at CJ. Yeah, the Rockets and the Texans might be playing crappy. Yeah, they might be down. But as long as you got those 2 young guys on your team, you're going to be good. And the Houston Texans and the Houston Rockets are in this position due to the draft. B. Scott, when I opened up the second segment with you, I talked about how different the conversations are with the Houston Texans 1 year later, and rightfully so, and thankfully so. As we look ahead to the 2024 draft, how do you think the Texans should go about, adding young talent to this core as of right now? Because I'm pretty sure, just like I was, you were surprised to see the Texans trade that number 23 overall pick. And now as we sit, as of right now, their first selection in the draft, which is, less than a month, their first pick is, I think, pick 42, and they got 2 second-round picks.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't as surprised as a lot of other people to see him trade the pick. I was surprised that they went as far back as they did. I thought 42 was a little steep than what I was thinking, but I wasn't surprised that they traded back. That's actually one of the things that I talked about quite a bit on the radio. I don't want to say quite a bit, but I mentioned it a couple times of like, hey man, trade. I think it was more likely that they trade back than trade up in this particular draft. And that's because of where they were at 23. To me, it would have taken a lot more than I think they would have been willing, and this turned out to be true, a lot more than they would have been willing to give up to get into the top, say, 12 or 15. And the feeling was that there were like 15 picks. This was like a, top 10 to 15 kind of draft. That's the sweet spot that you wanted to be in. And anything outside of that, then you might as well be just about anywhere. Just a lot of good players, but only a certain amount of great players was the feeling about this draft.
Yeah.
So the fact that they wouldn't see a much of a difference between, say, 20, like there is a difference between 23 and say 12 or 13, but not as big of a difference between, say, 23 and, at least I thought, like 35, 36. And they went all the way back to 42. So they clear. And then you heard D'Amico at the annual meetings, at the NFL meetings in Orlando, sort of explaining it, viewing that as a sweet spot where they still feel like they could get players in the second, third round that can come in and can contribute to them. So basically, that's a long-winded way of saying they view that pool of players as essentially the same. The back end of the first round and, the mid part, the early to mid part of the second round. So I'm intrigued by it. You look at what is projected to be available there, and I measure it up with some of the spots that I feel like they could stand to improve specifically, and I think they could get a wide receiver there. And we've all talked about, I think at this point, how it'd be nice to see them add another weapon. I think there will be weapons available around that spot. There could be a defensive tackle available there, and we talked about how they're going to have veterans in Tim Settle and Foley Fatukasi that are going to be there playing for them, and of course Danico Autry has some positional flexibility. But you look at a guy like a Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State who could be available to them in a spot around there. There will be cornerbacks available. Johnny Dixon of Penn State could be available. I'm trying to remember the really fast kid from Ricky, the really fast kid from Florida. I'm blanking on his last name right now. Starts with a P. But either way, like guys like that will be the wide receiver, will be available or could be available around that spot. And I think those are really good players that could come in and help this team. So I'm actually excited about it, or just excited to see how it all unfolds. It's obviously a lot harder to predict and project what's going to be available at 42 versus number 2 like last year, or number 12 before they traded. And obviously at number 3, like those are a lot more exciting. But I mean, we'll see, man. Darius Robinson, the Missouri defensive tackle, is somebody who could be available to them at that spot. So there are some names to look out for. And the second round, I mean, day 2, it's gonna be real fun to kind of just be able to kick back and see what's available to you on day 2, man. Enjoy that first day for what it is.
Last question before I let you go. We talk a lot about the D-line, wide receiver, cornerback. Like we talked about almost every single position, but the one position to me that really doesn't get enough spotlight on is the safety unit. What are your thoughts about the safety unit? And do you feel, yesterday they had an opportunity to free up more cap space, with the restructure of Titus Howard contract? Right now they sit, I believe, at like $31 million of projected, salary cap space. How do you feel the Houston Texans should improve their safety unit? Should they go out and bring one of the top tier safeties and, let a position battle take place between them and Petrie and Ward? Or do you think they should just, draft somebody in the draft? Or do you think they should just stay put where they are? And if the season started tomorrow, you would be okay with Petrie and Ward starting in the defensive backfield once again?
Well, so I think two things. I would be okay if they were starting, but I would do the first thing that you said. I don't have a problem with Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward starting for you at safety. I'm good with that. But to me, it's more about the opportunity that's in front of you to bring in a player that could upgrade the position significantly.
Yeah.
And if that means that one of those guys is competing with one another or with the other guy or whatever it is, I think that's fine. Basically, I don't think while I'd be fine with Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward starting, because I think that they're starting caliber safeties in the NFL, like there's no issue with that to me. I know that they are a little bit polarizing for people because Jalen Petrie had a down year last year. Jimmy Ward had his injury issues and his aging. So I get the knocks on both of them, but I wouldn't have a problem with either of them starting. To me, it's also true that neither of them is in a spot in their career where they should be like an unquestioned starter. Or if you could bring in a Justin Simmons or Quandre Diggs or whatever it is, like whoever's available and sounds good, like, or fits what you're trying to do. You know, when this run on safety, when all these safeties started getting released, like it was notable that there were at least 4 or 5 of them, 4 or 5 of them at least at the time that you could argue, and I think would credibly argue, were better than the guys that you got right now. You know, just like flat out better than the guys that you got right now, whether that just be resume or whatever you want to say, but like bring one of those guys in, okay? And if one of the other ones got to compete or whatever the case may be, like especially in Jalen Petrie's case, a guy who's going into his third season and is under contract for 2 more years. So like, yeah, I mean, if he has to, compete for his job, or it turns into a backup for a while and play and contributes more to you on special teams and in some spot duty, I think that that's perfectly fine. I don't see the issue with that. Especially given the particular opportunity you have as a team right now, and the fact that, like, if he's still under contract for a couple of more years, like he's got enough time to lose his job and win it back. So like it's not even that big of a deal if it happened, or if he had to take a back seat. But would I be comfortable if those were the 2 guys out there, especially given what you've done up front? Yeah, I can live with it.
Brandon K. Scott from Sports Radio 610. B. Scott, really quick, where can our listeners follow you at on all your social media platforms?
At Brandon K. Scott on now X, formerly known as Twitter, at B. Scott from Hiram Clark on Instagram, and make sure that y'all check out the H-Town Hoops podcast that we do on the Rockets with Odyssey, and the B Block podcast that I do solo.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, it's Cody COTY DAVIS _24. And be sure to follow my co-host John Hickman at John _Hickman 12. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.